Hey, I'm Dr. Elad Granot. I'm an entrepreneur, investor, and dean of Cleveland's Business School, the prestigious Boler College of Business at John Carroll University. This show is designed for those who think differently. We talk candidly about innovations in technology, in startups, venture capital, the global economy, higher education, how to lead, how to fail. We will leave no stone unturned. Expect passionate and sometimes controversial conversations with guests from all over the business spectrum once every month, wherever you stream your podcast. So today's episode covers business higher education, and maybe we'll get to the usage of AI because it's a big thing, but maybe I think there's some fatigue about talking about it. But I will talk candidly with Jonathan Aberman, who's the Dean and Professor of Practice, which I'm going to talk about as well, at Marymount College of Business, Innovation, Leadership, and Technology. And this is the bottom line with the business deans. And so Jonathan is our guest today. He's Professor of Practice, which again, I'm emphasizing because I want to talk about that. And usually we start the podcast with what's known as a hot take from me. And this time I'm not necessarily sure it's a hot take, but I have something I wanted to talk to you about, and I think you and I maybe discussed it when we talked last. And so I'm a business dean, you're a business dean, both of us are also, and you'll get to tell us about it, both of us are actually business guys running business schools. Right. And what drives me nuts every time is when I sort of meet people, talk to people, tell them what I do for my day job, they're like, oh, but you're a business guy. And it seems weird to them that a person who is in business, who's a practicing business person, is in academia running a business school, and it annoys me. And what I do is once I get past my annoyance, I ask them a rhetorical question, and that is, if I were a med school dean and a surgeon, would your reaction be the same? In fact, wouldn't you be puzzled if I were not a practicing physician as I'm a med school dean? And people think about it for a second and go, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so I wanted to run that by you, ask what your experience has been, and then maybe we can talk about why is that? Why are most of our contemporaries not practicing business people? And how does that contribute to higher education's present situation?
So this podcast is going to be in multiple episodes over a week period, right?
Yes, of course.
Look, I think the simplest answer I can give you is that I think it has to do with the way that education is thought of, particularly higher education. And you really have to go back, I think you have to go back to the 12 and 1300s, where education really was something that was done by highly educated, often clergy, but people that were from the learned classes who were bringing people in the upper classes into a higher state of academic understanding. And believe it or not, I think that has continued to taint, and I'll use the word taint, the view of what higher education is vis-a-vis, say, technical education. The idea is that somehow, and it's reinforced, frankly, by issues like tenure, which is driven by research rather than by practical experience, by a belief that technical education is somehow for the middle or lower classes. It permeates, and accordingly, I think that what happens, a lot of educational institutions, the governance is driven by tenured professors, the progression is governed by tenured professors. There's a very strong bias in favor of maintaining that higher education is higher education. And I'm sure that you've seen this. I certainly have. I've had many conversations where I talk about the programs we offer in the context of product lines, because I'm a venture capitalist who is working as a dean. And when I look at programs, what I'm asking myself is, what's my product market fit? We launched a DBA program last year. I had a very strong view that frankly wasn't held by many, that there was a strong opportunity for a practical doctorate in business analytics, particularly in Washington, D.C. And the program has exploded in importance because there's a strong product market fit. So, yeah, I think that one of the biggest challenges that academia has, frankly, particularly now, is that it's being constrained more and more by the internet and by the, so I'm going to call it the democratization of data and democratization of innovation and information. How do you maintain this concept of higher education being an elite, removed, high priest kind of knowledge thing in a world where students are more and more looking at it from the standpoint of what's the value for the dollar I'm spending? And how do we address that in a way that preserves everybody's individual pride in being really learned, which frankly is important, with,
Yeah.
frankly, a customer-driven mentality on the part of parents and students saying, it's great that you're highly knowledgeable, I'm glad you are, but when you're done with me, am I employable?
Yeah. Well, you said so many things that I want to unpack. And you're right. Well, first of all, we're both venture capitalists running business schools. And again, I just, for the life of me, you're telling me that this is the situation that we're facing is a 900-year-old situation,
Right.
which is insane, right? If we were talking about any other industry that's adhering to whatever it was like 900 years ago, we would literally say that is insane. And so, except maybe, I don't know, the church or something along those
Well,
lines,
but
which
I
even
think you
then, yeah, go ahead.
but you've identified a very important point, which is exactly that, that there are certain institutions in a civilized society that are the places where basically people develop the skills to exist within a civilized society. And you've identified, frankly, the two primary institutions, which are education and places of faith, because those are two places in our society where you really do learn the the code of conduct for what it means to be civilized.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't know whether we're touching this or not, but if you really want to get meta on it, the culture wars right now are all about, wait a minute, this is an institution where people are actually trained how to live with a society. What kind of society do I want to live in? And a time when there's such different views. You know what I mean? So it's a very, I think you're exactly right, but that's the challenge we have, and I think religion has faced it too. If you look at the growth of mega churches and the various things we see, I mean, a lot of ways, look, capitalism and customer power has permeated our society. It's been accelerated by the internet. All that's happening now is our two key pillars in our society, from the standpoint of how do you behave, religion and education, are both now challenged in very significant ways by what about me? What does this mean for me? How does this help me
Well,
vis-a-vis?
I agree, and what worries me as someone who does care about higher education, and we'll talk about what drew you into doing what you're doing, and I'll share what drew me into doing what I'm doing. But what worries me is if that parallel exists, and I accept that it does. The largest, fastest growing religious denomination is none.
Right.
And so if we're going to keep drawing this parallel, and we're seeing seeds of this, the fastest growing student segment is going to be none. I don't need college. And we hear a lot of that, and I always say that it's well earned. We did everything in our power to earn this sort of criticism. And now, having said that, I do always try to point out a couple of things. First of all, higher education is too broad of a category. If you're going to pursue an undergraduate degree in English literature, like I did, that is completely different than someone who's going to pursue an undergraduate degree in finance. And your prospects are different, your opportunities are different, the processes that you go through are different, and so it's not a good idea to say higher education. Because it's just too broad. Even within business, I always maintain that there's a huge difference among the top 10 or 20 business schools, whether or not they deserve to be top 10 or 20 is a whole other podcast, a week-long podcast. But let's say we accept that, then between them and all of us. And I would also say that for our students, broad generalization, those who are not top 10, not even top 50 programs, the business education, undergrad and grad, matters a lot. It changes their lives, their prospects, and so even when we talk about higher education, I think it's too broad. But even when we talk about business schools, I think it's too broad. And so when we get all this criticism, which, as I admit, is 100% justified, at the end of the day, what we provide, what drew me, and maybe I'll tell you what drew me, and then I'd like to hear from you what drew you to higher ed. What drew me into higher ed is the opportunity, the privilege, really. I'm not using this word cynically. The privilege to work with young people as they go into their lives and careers. There's really no other opportunity to do that. Employers don't want to be bothered with that. And by the way, some of them are starting to do that because we're not doing it well enough or at all. And so I before I go too far into the soapbox speech, I'll just say, at the end of the day, I truly believe in the power of business higher education if it's done with a clear sight of ROI and outcomes. And that's why I'm doing this. It's certainly not for the money and or for any other thing that possibly is a perk of being in higher education, other than working with students.
You don't do it for the glory? Really?
Yeah. There's so much glory. I mean, look at
there's
us
so much.
now.
It's incredible.
Yes,
There's so much glory. So, a couple of things in response. Number one, I think that when we were talking a few moments ago about the non-denominational aspects of people of faith, there's general alienation in our society, and people are drawing away from the standard ways to learn how to participate because, frankly, in a lot of ways, either society doesn't appear like it's working out for them, or they're concerned it's not going to work out. There's a lot of cynicism and alienation. And to your point about ROI, I don't think there's ever been a moment in time where those of us that are concerned about the future of society should not be more engaged in figuring out how to have our students and our friends and our loved ones, the people in the community, be less alienated. We need to find ways to engage with them. And when I had the opportunity to come here to Marymount, I was literally minding my own business, driving on the Beltway in DC. Traffic's absolutely terrible. I'm stuck in a traffic jam, and the chairman of the board is an old friend of mine, calls me up and says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, at the moment I'm sitting in the Beltway not doing anything." And he said, "I can fix your commute. You want to come and work at Marymount and be our dean?" I live 5 minutes from Marymount. So you had me a commute. But the reason why I took the job was I feel very strongly, and I invest in technology, that technology is amoral, but in a lot of ways, technology right now is creating more alienation, not less. And that we have an obligation to our young people to empower them to be able to succeed in a world where connections are phony connections, but real connections require that you actually bring something to the party, right? So business education broadly is, how do you create something, or how do you present yourself in a way that's going to be valuable to somebody else and motivate them? So whether it's being a really good strategist, being very strong in entrepreneurship, being very strong in design thinking, creativity, strong technologies, whatever it is, bring something to the party. Because if you bring something to the party, people want you around. And if people want you around, then you get connection. You don't feel alienated. And you're absolutely right. We in some ways, in my opinion, we actually have gone back to the 12 and 1300s. We just don't see it that way. But what we're really doing is we now have a bigger responsibility to teach people how to participate in society than we have in the last 900 years.
Yeah.
Thanks to AI, which I'm sure you're going to talk about. We have this enormous responsibility to give people the tools. And you know what? Reading and writing, logical thinking, it's all related. And I think that's the part that, frankly, a lot of our peers in the education industry have completely lost the thread. They somehow think it's about them. It's about my research. It's about my progression. It's about my greatness. God bless them. You know what? Those things are table stakes. So people will take you seriously, so you can give them the thing they really need, which is salience in a world where they're alienated. You know?
And 100% I know. And so, you bring up tech and the importance. I too am a tech investor, and luckily, and I say that, honestly, because it keeps me plugged in to emerging technologies. And so I noticed I'm privileged to serve at a Jesuit institution, a liberal arts institution, and with a phenomenal dually accredited AACSB business school, state of the art. And we have like many universities, we have a liberal arts core that every student needs to go through as part of being a student in a liberal arts institution. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think if you stop there, then you stop 800 years ago. So I implemented with my leadership team what we call a tech core, which complements the liberal arts core, because the liberal arts core, and I'm a big believer, I told you my undergrad was in English lit, it was very deliberate. And the reason is it builds this common foundations for us to communicate. It allows us a way of thinking which is critical, which is intelligent, which is inquisitive, all that great stuff. Without technology, it's insufficient. I'm not saying you need to be a coder. By the way, I used to say that. I used to say it up about to 5 years ago, maybe. You need to know coding. It's the new language of business. You don't need to know coding. You can tell AI what to do. It'll do it. Literally, there are models now where you can talk to it and tell it, put up a web page that does this, this, and that, and it does it. And so there's no need to know how to code, but there's a need to be what I call digitally and technologically proficient, understanding where the intersection of emerging technologies and business is, and then being accepting of it. Just like when you study for or earn an MBA, you go through a variety of disciplines. You're not going to be a CPA, but you're going to understand how accounting works with business. You're going to understand how finance does, and so on and so on. Same thing with technology. So we implemented this tech core, and basically all of my department chairs and program directors have taken on that charge and developed and are still developing these courses within disciplines that are tech focused. And of course, that's going to be maybe the segue to AI. Within our entrepreneurship program, we took a strong emphasis on AI because it really lends itself to everything, and everything in business at least. And one of the things that I just had a huge AI conference at the university. Ohio in general, we're trying to make a push for AI. Our lieutenant governor is sort of the tech czar for the state. He was at the event. We had everyone you can think of who does something within that space on campus. And there were two lines that I thought were great coming out of that event. One is we need to be building smarter businesses. And the other is AI is not a threat or some sort of panacea. It is what it is, but it is creating new sets of problems. So being a creative, smart, inquisitive business person who is learning how to build smart businesses will equip you to work with AI, not just in terms of what it provides, in terms of all these amazing things that it does, but it will create new sets of problems because it's a software program, and as you know, these things always fail. And so, how do you sort of, we have a saying. Our president says that he wants our students to surprise the future, not be surprised by it, and I think that's a great mission and a great line. Certainly, it focuses me. I couldn't help but notice. There's going to be a question mark at the end of this. I couldn't help but notice, that your college is business, innovation, leadership, and technology, right? And so you're already a step ahead of us. We're just implementing a tech core. You literally have it in the name. Tell me how that works. Tell me how that translates day to day and where that comes from.
Well, so number one, I agree with your viewpoint on AI. I think that AI. We haven't seen a significant change in the structure of the capitalist economy similar to this. The last time was steam power. Mm-hmm. This is the last time you had a technological advance that was so dramatically going to change the structure of an economy. And steam power meant that human power, horsepower, substitute for steam. It changed the world from an agrarian economy to industrial economy and put a lot of people out of work, but then new jobs got created. And there's a lot of similarity in the way that we now have a new technology. It is basically changing as we speak how industries function. So it's a significant event. The line I use is you either use technology or you get used by it. So that's my tagline for your president. Yeah. Now, because of my background, because I've been invested in software for many years, I'm not going to say I'm a savant, but I knew, because I could tell where machine learning was going, that machine learning was just going to get better and better at repetitive tasks. And really all that's happened now is they've attached machine learning to basically a really, really good spell checker that can mimic human behavior. But the machine learning stuff that's been going on has been getting closer and closer to mimicking specific intelligence for a long time. So using the artificial intelligence terms, specific intelligence, the ability to do something of a repetitive nature, no matter how complex it is. Humans are good at that, but you can make software good at that. The real issue is general intelligence. How do you take information that's completely novel and new? So the analogy I give to people is, you can train a software that every time a rooster crows, it's morning. But the software isn't going to know why the rooster didn't crow one morning. Sure, maybe somebody choked the chicken out, couldn't stand it anymore. Or maybe it's like a Twilight Zone episode and the Earth's fallen into the sun. Software can't imagine. So to your question of what are we doing at Marymount, or what did I do as a VC?
Yes.
So the first thing that we did was we fully merged the technology and the business programs. So our degrees are very interdisciplinary. And so the business students can take technology can take business, and we integrated undergrad and graduate. But then 2 years ago, we merged the art and design school, fashion, merchandising, interior design, and fashion, graphic design, we merged it into the business school. So unlike other places like Parsons, say, or Savannah School of the Arts and so forth, the art school is actually part of our college. And what that does is it allows us to really start to infuse creativity into the entrepreneurship curriculum, the business curriculum, the technology curriculum. So our next step, and what I'm working on this summer with a half dozen professors, is I've tasked them within their areas of expertise, which include engineering, AI, entrepreneurship, economics. I want you to take AI, I want you to take creativity, I want you to infuse in each of your curriculum. So we're going to launch new minors in creativity and human-centered design in the business college, and then a master's, and possibly even remake our DBA and make a real run at it. Because to your point, what I always say, and I've always said for years to my students, is the MBA in particular, but the undergraduate business degree, is the responsible adult in industry. And everybody's running around the hair on fire. What do we do? What do we do? The business person is the one who raises hands and says, have you thought about this strategically? Have you thought about our mission? It's the ability to be the catcher in the rye. And I think that is what ultimately the best business people do. Frankly, it's what the best venture investors do. Yeah. We sit back and say, all right, I know right now you're running around with your hair on fire. Once you're done hyperventilating, let's work the problem. Yeah. And that's what a great business education and a business education that's what it's all about. And we're giving kids the tools so they can be a leader, which is why I wanted to make sure leadership was in the name of the college, because ultimately this is about leadership.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting you mentioned that. There's so many things I want to pick up on. Well, first of all, the three regular listeners that I have to this podcast may recall. Ashley says it's a little bit more than three, but
I was told you had 10,000 listeners, so
pretty much somewhere between 3 and 10,000.
Well, whoever we're talking to, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Literally, if you hung on until now, wow. Or maybe whoever we're talking to get a life. But other than that, one of the things that I've spoken about before is leadership, in the sense that I've been in leadership positions for a long time. And what I always say is it's an interesting challenge to teach leadership, just like it is to teach sales. I compare the two because some people are born leaders, just like some people are born salespeople. Now, what that means is not necessarily that you can't teach it, but I equate it to being tall and playing basketball, right? You can teach basketball all you want to someone who is 5'2". Someone who's 7'2" will eventually be a better player. And so now you can point to it, you can say, hey, and I think you can aspire to it. And I think it's a big deal. We have a strong and thriving leadership minor that I'm a big supporter of. But I always point out that some people are born leaders. You know it when you see it. It's kind of hard to define. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't teach it as a discipline, as a minor, as an approach to management. But that wasn't what I was going to grab onto from what you said. And here's a sacrilegious idea that I have, but I'll start by an example where it worked and then see if it still holds water. So we have many claims to fame here in Cleveland. One of them is healthcare sector. And specifically, some of the players that we have here are on a global level. And one of them is the Cleveland Clinic. And the gentleman that ran the Cleveland Clinic for a long time, quite successfully, Dr. Toby Cosgrove, at some point implemented a demand for department heads and above to have an MBA. And if they don't, they should go pursue it. And if they're applying for it and they don't have it, they might as well not apply. And I thought that was great. And I still think that is great because you could be a phenomenal surgeon, right? And at some point, if you do everything right, you'll have leadership opportunities, and you could end up being, based on your skill level, you could end up running the surgery department in a huge health system. Meanwhile, never in your life have you learned to or needed to read a financial statement. You don't know how to work with people, processes, budgets, and you're expected to. And I think not having a formal background or any background in business and having business responsibilities is the root of all evil in the healthcare industry. And this is where I'm going to go out on a limb. I think there's a problem in higher ed. If we have folks running universities at senior levels without business experience and without business training and proficiency, that cannot be a coincidence that we are seeing institutions who are not doing well financially and otherwise. And so if you know, I don't know why on earth I would want to do that, but if one day I were to give up being the business dean, which is the best job on any campus, and somehow get lured into being president, I think I would make that demand. You want to run a unit in the university? Have an MBA at the very least. What do you think about that?
Well, I think whoever your dean was would love you forever, but because it's nothing like a mandate to create enrollment.
Well, yeah.
I think that we have an interesting phenomenon, which is that many of our knowledge-based professions are organized fundamentally around a partnership progression model. For example, law firms, or accounting firms, or physicians, or a higher education, and that we promote the people that are best at the core activity. So I manage lawyers. I was on management of a number of significant international law firms. I actually put together the business plan for what was then the largest law firm merger in history. So I've managed partners, I've managed tenured professors. And what happens is you promote people based upon skills that make them good at what they do, but there's nothing about those skills that make them a good administrator or a good leader.
Yep.
Law firms are notorious for this. Law firms promote the partners who have the biggest book of business into management roles. And, you know, the skills necessary to have a big practice generally are things like you're a really great lawyer. You're also probably going to be an incredibly hard-charging, sharp-elbowed, type A personality with not a lot of, I hate to say it, not a lot of nuance. You know? And by the same token, if you become a really, really top-level accountant in one of the big fours, you are a really, really good accountant. You're very much an organizational person, right? Different culture. And if you're an academic and you become a provost or a president, you have to have published. You have to be a recognized academic. Well, those things all take a lot of time. And none of those things have anything to do with what you described, which is how do you formulate an organizational strategy? How do you formulate a business model? How do you formulate a strategy for market product fit? How do you even, you mentioned financial statements, how do you understand what an income statement is, and how do you look at a cash flow statement and say, well, why is my cash flow so out of whack? So the idea of, to my mind, of insisting somebody do an MBA is actually based in the belief that there are different skills necessary to lead and grow an organization than there are to be a really great professor, really great lawyer, really great accountant, or a really great president of the United States. So, I mean, look at our political process. Who gets elected? The person who's like, I'm going to raise a buck ton of money, make a bunch of promises, and one day I'm going to have the most powerful job in the world, which requires me to manage an enormous bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Or not.
Yeah. Well, you know, there's this term that with the growth of understanding or popularity or knowledge of AI, there's this term of when it gets things wrong or insists on stuff that is right that we know is wrong, and it's called a hallucination. And I think it can apply to if you are a really good physicist or anesthesiologist, or a law partner, if you're really, really good at it, right? You got all the bona fides, you got the track record, it could cause a hallucination
Well, you think you're good at everything.
that you're good at everything.
Look, you and I see
Exactly.
this all the time in entrepreneurship. I mean, how many angel investors have you and I worked with that made a lot of money by being a great real estate investor and invest in a software company and then get angry
Yeah.
because it doesn't work the way it did when they were doing real estate?
That's a perfect example, and that is a problem, right? Because on the one hand, you understand why they would think that, even though it really is not a rational thought, right? It gets even worse, right? And so if you are a brilliant student, undergrad, and you go straight to your master's, and then you're a brilliant grad student, and then you go straight to your doctorate, and you're a brilliant doctoral student, and you go into a tenure track position, you have literally never worked or gathered experience in your life, right? And now you're in an academic institution where you're required to publish, whether you are a physicist, a psychology professor, a philosophy professor, or a finance professor. You have the same requirements, essentially, which is crazy. And then if you publish enough, you get tenured. And if you don't screw things up, you have a chance of being department head simply because it's your turn, not because you have any ambition to do it. And all of a sudden, you are associate dean and dean material, and before you know it, you might be provost and president material. Meanwhile, you've never gathered any sort of practical experience. And what worries me is that you have institutions of hundreds of millions of dollars that you're managing.
Well, yeah.
And what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I mean, first of all, you've identified a progress. I mean, you talk about publishing. You've got a self-referential echo chamber where the people who are promoted are the people who are writing things that are approved and valued by the people who are tenured, and it's self-referential. Look, I forget who it was, and I feel terrible. I can't remember, but I'm going to quote somebody I can't remember who said that a good chunk of liberal arts universities is going to be out of business in the next 5, 10 years,
Yeah.
and it is a fact because they're surplus in the blunt world of industry. There's surplus capacity for an undifferentiatable product. This is why, this is why fundamentally business deans are so important, in my opinion, for the future of the universities that they're at, because we're the only people, sadly, or maybe luckily, who live our lives, particularly if we come in from a non-traditional background, to say, wait a minute, why should this place exist? I know it has, but why? Why should it exist 20 years from now? What does it bring into the party? And that is to your point. A lot of universities are going to face the demographic cliff that's happening. A lot of universities are facing the changing dynamics of people's willingness to take on debt. And frankly, I think some of it is politically motivated and so forth, but it does exist. And a changing society where university degree may not necessarily result in the economic outcome people want. How do you address that? And if the answer is, I will just lower my standards or give more financial aid, you're just chasing yourself to the bottom at a time when more efficient places, large state universities, online universities, basically, if you're going to try to compete on volume, you can't unless you're large. And if you're going to compete on price, you're going to lose. That's what you and I know as business people. So liberal arts, small universities, bring value every day or get ready for, a sad outcome.
And it's a hard conversation to have because if you say it as the business dean, you generate resentment, right? As if it's your fault. All you're doing is diagnosing the issue. You're not creating the issue. There's a lot of ego. That's the other thing in our industry, right? Which compares to healthcare and I guess to law as well. Plenty of titles to go around, and a lot of degrees and other things that create again, I'm going to use this term, a hallucination of expertise.
But you know what's funny? I'll share this with you. A number of years ago, I was talking with the president of another university here in town, and we were just getting to know each other and socializing. And he said, "So, how did you find how did you find the difference of managing partners, a law firm, managing academics?" And I said, "It was really easy." He said, "Why?" And I said, "Well, because lawyers, they're type A, they come at you and they want to murder you. It's all in your face. With academia, we're the last bastion of the passive aggressives. right? So he laughed. I mean, he laughed out loud. We knew exactly what it meant, which is the way to get things done in an academic setting is to be respectful of everybody's intelligence. Understand that when they say, well, I don't know, you listen, but then ultimately you have responsibility to act.
Yeah.
And you bring along, and I think that there is a way for academia to succeed. There is a way for business school deans to succeed. But I think in the first instance, you have to understand the mindset of your customer, your primary customer, which is your tenured professors, to make sure that they understand you love them and appreciate what they're doing. And all you're trying to do is bring them into a situation where they can succeed further.
Yeah, that's incredibly harder to do than to say, but that is the challenge, right? And so it's interesting because look, there's this term. So we talked about tenure, whether we're for or against it is immaterial. It's what is. Shared governance is another term that you hear a lot about, and I'm all for. Look, I started out as tenure track faculty when I decided that I was going to go into higher ed. I wanted to learn it from the guts, right, to understand it, and then I took on administrative responsibilities. I understand and appreciate shared governance. Here's the point I always try to make when I understand, appreciate, and apply it. Shared governance to me also means shared responsibility. And if you're not going to have shared responsibility, then it's not really that's not shared governance. It's shared opinion, and then you go ahead and do it, and I'll take no responsibility for it. That I won't accept. And I think until we insist on complete shared governance, we're always going to be sort of limping around and not really fulfilling our potential.
Well, that's what I meant about, the last bastion of passive aggressive. At the end of the day, shared governance can be a wonderful way to say, well, I don't know, could be this, could be that, which is a big, basically, no, I'm not going to do it. And the
Yep.
only way to deal with that is to be respectful of shared governance and ultimately make people own the outcome in a
Yep.
nice way. Say, well, okay, but we need to make a decision because enrollment's falling, or that's okay, but we need to. And what I find, and it goes back to leadership, leadership 101 is anytime you're doing change management, 20% want to change, 20% don't, and you're fighting for the middle.
Yep.
And what I have found over the years is that most people in academia are driven by data and are driven by fairness. So if you can present data and you can treat people fairly, you can generally get done what you need to get done through shared governance. But when you have a situation where the professors don't trust you, where they don't think that you have their best interests at heart, and leadership is walking every day the walk of empathy. If you are the kind of person who's like, do what I want right now, you're dead. Shared
Mm.
governance will passive aggressive you forever. And I think when I look at the presidents and the provosts, the deans, and we all know them that are lying slaughtered around America right now as the institutions flail, almost universally what they have in common is they think that governance means I do what I want, and if you don't agree, I get you out of the way. And that may work in industry, although I don't think it does, but it sure as hell doesn't work in academia.
Yeah, we're wrapping up here. I got the helicopter sign, but as you said that, look, I'll admit and I'll confess, it took me a while to transition out of that state of mind, and I have the scars to prove it.
But you still have your
Um,
job, so there you go.
we'll see. I don't know. I wasn't at the office today, but I started in military, then I went into business, then I went into higher ed. In military, I could give orders. In business, you know how it is, and then in higher ed, it isn't either one of these places. And I did have a trajectory of learning and growth, and like I said, I confess, and maybe some days I'm still at least thinking that we really should be doing this. But the reality of what we do is that there is a process, and you need to respect, acknowledge, and participate in it. And it took me a while to learn it. I'm still learning. So we're wrapping up, and I always ask, and I always put people on the spot. I hate when people do this to me, but hey, why not? Yeah. We could edit it out if it's terrible. Last thought, things that you wanna leave our listeners with.
Well, I think the most important thing is you're not alone if you feel like the world is a complex place and you're feeling alienated. I would hope that what you take away from today's episode is that two people who could do a hundred or a million different things in their lives have chosen to spend every day trying to work the problem with a bunch of other people. And I think that for all of us, there are people out there that are trying to make connections, make bridges, make opportunities for people to feel salient. So you're feeling alienated, go out into the community and engage. Go out to a university, engage. Go out to a club and engage. Go off and pick up a hobby. Do something to get engaged, because human engagement, frankly, is the one thing that will matter the most in an AI-driven world. Yeah. So I guess that's my thought.
Thank you. That's inspiring. And I always say AI is important, but human intelligence is probably more important, and forever will be. And I don't want to live to see when it isn't. So, Jonathan, thanks so much for being a great colleague, and thanks so much for your time and insight today. And I hope we'll get to talk real soon. Thanks again.
Me too. I hope that the 15,000 people listening enjoyed the podcast. We'll see you soon.
All right, man. Talk later.
Bye.
Hey, so thanks for joining us for The Bottom Line with the Business Dean. If you liked what you saw and you liked what you heard, please leave us a rating and a review. And be sure to check out the Boler College of Business on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for more of what's happening with the Business Dean. That's me. And we'll see you next time.